and welcome to episode 14 of Live from Vaders Castle. I'm your host, John Lee, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dan McQuarrie.
Hello, how are we doing?
Not too bad, not too bad. I'm not sure if you can tell, but my voice is slightly croaky after celebrating England's goal yesterday and then shouting at the TV for the other 88 minutes.
Having that at one moment of glory 2 minutes into the game and then just been miserable for the rest.
Yeah, so my voice has taken a hit, but it's recovered slowly throughout the day, so hopefully it's not too bad.
Yeah, I'm also knackered out, but it's my legs, not my throat, because I was away this weekend conquering Ben Nevis. I've now reached the top of the UK's tallest mountains. That's ticked off my bucket list. So that's why you're getting this episode late, because I was away on the west coast of Scotland enjoying myself, and John was having a miserable time watching the Euros. So
two very different weekends.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, we're here to talk about Into the Dark, aren't we?
We are, yeah. This has been this month's book club. Into the Dark by Claudia Gray was the next book after Light of the Jedi that we read in the High Republic series.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very excited to talk about this. Actually, I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. I had a lot of thoughts the first time I read it, and I didn't have anyone to chat those thoughts to. So it's good that John's read it now. I've re-listened to it as my audiobook experience. We'll definitely talk about the audiobook factor as well. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah. I mean, first off, I'm just going to sound to put it out there. I really enjoyed it. Unbelievable book. Claudia Gray, her way with words is unbelievable. The way she forms a story and the character development and what an author.
Yeah.
Take my hat off to her.
Yeah, I'm glad you're finally on the Claudia Gray train, because Into the Dark was my first trip into the mind of Claudia Gray, and then I read Lost Stars and Bloodline, and she continues to blow me away with the quality of writing and character development and all that stuff. So yeah, my overall thoughts as well. Very big fan of this book. I don't like it quite as much as Light of the Jedi, but I mean, they're two very different types of books. Light of the Jedi is a big cinematic event book, and this is a more sort of close, character-driven, sort of contained story. On my list of Star Wars books, I think I have like Light of the Jedi about third and this like fourth or fifth. So they're very close together. So I do really enjoy both of them, and this one was a great read and a great reread. So yeah, how was your overall experience? Because I know you were on the audiobook as well. What did you think of it?
Yeah, I did a little bit of audiobook, a little bit of like paperback reading, because I hadn't ordered it and I was running out of time to read it. So I was like, I'll get the audiobook so I can listen to it in the car and stuff. Help me get through it. But I think the audiobook experience is something I've never done before, but I would highly recommend. I just use Audible, and I got a couple of free credits, I think, because I've got Amazon Prime. But I definitely recommend it to anyone out there who's like more maybe a casual reader and hasn't got time to sit down for like 3 hours in a day and like read a book. Like, you can stick it on in the car, stick it on while you're walking. In the end, I ended up listening to the audiobook while reading the book at the same time once I got around to ordering the book. Just because, one, it's a bit easier, I suppose, having it read to you. But the background noise that they add into the audiobook, so like, it's not like the old audiobooks they used to have where like someone would literally just read, and maybe if there was like a sound effect in the writing, they'd put it in there or something like that. But in this one, I don't know how common it is, but you had like background music every now and again. Like, you'd have sound effects of like if someone described the room or what someone was doing, there'd be like sound effects for it. Some lovely moments in the book when things would happen. We'll talk about later, but things would happen, and you'd get like the music from the actual Star Wars films. I think like Binary Sunsets was in there a couple of times. Things like that. And it really helps you get engrossed into the story. And especially when you're sitting there reading the book in front of you, and then you can hear that music as well, and like all the sound effects. It really like you feel like you're in the world, and that combine that with Claudia Gray's writing is just. Oh, I don't think I'm going to go back to reading any other way now, apart from having like an audiobook with the book at least, because it's just fantastic.
Yeah, so this was my first Star Wars audiobook. I mean, I used to listen to audiobooks when I was a kid. On my old iPod Nano or whatever it was, I used to have like audiobooks on there, but I haven't listened to an audiobook in probably at least 10, 15 years. So this was an interesting experience. I agree. I loved the sound effects, the music. I even loved the voice actor. The narrator would do different accents for all the different characters. Particularly liked his Leox voice. He sounded like a combination of Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey, which I thought was really funny. But yeah, I think the only thing I struggle with audiobooks is sometimes you can just think of other things, and then it's been a minute and you've just missed a minute of what the narrator's been saying because you've got distracted by something, which is why I agree having the book in front of you as well is really handy. My only reason that I'm probably going to read more than I'm going to listen is just because I read about twice as quick as the narrator narrates. So like recently I just read The Rising Storm, and I probably got through that in like a total of 8 hours reading time. And if that was narration, it probably would have been like an 11 and 12 hour thing. So I just got through it quicker, which obviously when I'm a busy lad, got to get through things quickly. But no, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good audiobook. There were a couple of moments, as John said, where like Binary Sunset or Yoda's theme like kicked in, little tear to my eye. Star Wars has that advantage of having really emotive music where they can just drop it in anywhere and it just makes you feel something. So yeah, I enjoyed the audiobook experience. I will definitely do it again, but I don't think it's going to be like my regular. I think I'm going to sprinkle it about. Maybe if I'm doing like a reread of something, I'm doing it for a second time, like I was doing with Into the Dark, I might try the audiobook. But to answer your question, yeah, basically all the Star Wars audiobooks from at least the past 5 years do the sound effects, the music, the sort of voice acting and that sort of thing. So it's very commonplace, John, if you're doing it again.
Yeah, I think I'm probably going to have to be honest. So that's good that they all do that. Just because I did find the one annoying thing about it, I found, which is maybe just the app I was using, but like on Audible, you could change the speed of like how they were talking. So like, when I was reading it, I put the speed up a bit to like, I think I put it to like 1.6, 1.7 to help it keep up with like how fast I can read. But then when you like get in a car or you're using like a third party like software sort of thing, not your phone, it doesn't keep that speed. So then you go back to like normal listening. So it's really weird. So like, you'd be listening like 1.6, 1.7, like with your headphones on, and then you get in the car to listen to it and it's dropped back down to 1 and it feel like really slow. But yeah, I really enjoyed it as an experience.
Yeah,
and I would definitely recommend just at least giving it a go. Because I mean, it's not for everyone, I'm sure, but yeah, give it a go if you. I think you can get a free trial on Audible or something. So if you're listening and want to read the next Star Wars book, was it Rising Storm? Give that an audio book go, maybe.
Yeah, hopefully at some point we'll be able to have one of those little Audible links that if your listeners use it, we get money. We don't have one of them, sadly, but hopefully one day.
One day, yeah.
But yeah, definitely, it's worth a try and worth an experience. And I'm quite interested to maybe revisit some of the other books that I've already read and get sort of the audiobook experience. The one I'm particularly interested in trying again with the audiobook is Lost Stars, which is another Claudia Gray book, which I absolutely adore. But just because of its setting within the original trilogy and the different characters and stuff, I'd be quite interested to see what the music and the voice acting and that sort of thing is like in that book. So that's potentially one that I might revisit. But we'll go to our just specific overall thoughts on the story, the characters, the mysteries, all that sort of stuff. Big spoilers from this point onwards. If you haven't read Into the Dark, we will be spoiling every single detail for the next 45 minutes to an hour. So there's your warning. John, give us your broad overall thoughts on everything.
I was just saying to you before we started, like the thing I really enjoyed about it, and I found really clever, is how like intertwined it is with the other High Republic multimedia we got going on at the moment. So obviously we got this book, Into the Dark, and we had like the Jedi. I know there's a couple other ones I haven't read, but I'm sure it's the same for them. And then you got the comic series as well. So they're all running at the same time pretty much, and the stories intertwine really well, I think, which is it feels rewarding when something is like in a different book and then you see it in a different in a comic and something. So I think that was really clever. But then I as you said, it's an independent story, so I like how intertwined it was, but then separate enough with their own things. So like obviously the hyper space disaster that destroyed the Legacy run and that whole big thing in Light of the Jedi like impacted the storyline and the characters in this, but not massively. So it was still a good, nice, independent story.
Yeah, it sort of it created the story, but then it didn't navigate it any further than that. Like it put the characters in one place together, the Legacy Run disaster, but then the story went on naturally after that.
Yeah, I loved the new villains that we got in the Dengar. Well, I suppose they're new in this book. But
the Drengir.
Drengir, that's it.
Yeah.
And if you've been reading the comics, which is slightly ahead, they're in that as well, which is brilliant. So like, I literally just read issue 4 of the comic after I finished reading the book, and they're in that. But obviously, both stories a lot, which is I found really, as I just said, really satisfying.
Yeah, I think isn't it issue 4 when they sort of like give the Drengir a little bit of background and you actually see the scene where like the Jedi release them in the Amaxine station. I think that's in issue 4, isn't it?
It is, yeah. You see like how they're, because in this book Into the Dark, it's kind of hinted at their relationship with like the Sith. Then they kind of give a little bit more detail in the issue 4 of the comic about how they joined forces with the Sith, and then obviously the Sith betrayed them because that's what the Sith do, and how they ended up getting trapped on the Amaxine station in this book. So yeah, they correlated quite well actually. Just finishing reading that.
Yeah, it was quite nice because this book sort of became the like big introduction to the Drengir, and then sort of you get to the end of the book and you think, oh, so it's all over and done with. And then the comics then are picking up this story of, in actual fact, the Drengir are still out there. And that story continues quite significantly. It sort of is almost like a passing of the torch of like Into the Dark introduces the Drengir, then the torch is passed on to the comics. And then they're taking the Drengir story forward, which I think is a really interesting idea. I was in an interview, Claudia Gray was saying that it was Cavan Scott who wrote the High Republic comics and the Rising Storm who came up with the idea for the Drengir as a villain. And then basically she was like, oh, that's a cool idea. We'll introduce it in my book and then you can take them on and do whatever you want to do in the comic. And then we'll see where they go in the future. I don't know what's going to happen with them further down the line. But just that relationship that the writers have when they're sort of passing ideas to each other and they're all forming this world together completely shows on paper. And obviously the fact that you've just witnessed it by reading that issue just after finishing the book, just it is really satisfying, particularly if you're trying to be like a completionist like I am, which is like reading every single thing that comes out of the High Republic. You just notice so many things that link up and it is just nothing but satisfying.
Yeah. I mean, I really liked I really like Claudia Gray's style of writing and how she moved the plot forward, but then there was like plot twists and mysteries that carried on throughout like almost the entire book that were then resolved with answers that you read, like there were breadcrumbs for it and stuff. It's just fantastic. I mean, you had the whole bit with like obviously the way the Nile introduced in this book as well. It's fantastic. That was a big plot twist. You had the whole thing with Des Rydan, again, fantastic. But one of my favourite aspects of the entire book, which I'm sure we'll probably talk about a bit more later, is how she wrote the character of Geode. Like,
yes.
Every time that came up, I was like, this is just absolutely genius. It was like writing a character by them having, like, writing a whole personality of a character by them doing nothing.
Yeah, we will have a very specific Geode discussion later on in the episode because we've had some specific questions about Geode. So we will have a very specific discussion about Geode. But I completely agree. The way that Claudia Gray writes Geode is genius. And I remember when Into the Dark first came out, there was like a lot of backlash from people who hadn't read the book about Geode being like, oh, they've made a character about a rock. How stupid is this? And I remember watching a video and people were just like, read the book, you'll get it. And I was like, okay, fine. So I read the book, instantly understood it. I was like, this is one of my favorite characters ever. And he's a rock. It's just so well written. And I can't wait just to see Geode in everything from now onwards. I want him to appear in every High Republic book comic. I don't know. I want a video game where you just play as Geode. I don't know.
We need more Geode.
Yeah, definitely. More Geode. But yeah, I agree. I think the thing that I love the most about this book is just the characters. I genuinely haven't walked away from this book not loving any of the main, I guess, 7 characters. Obviously, you've got Reef Silas, Des Ryden, Comac Vitus, Orla Tereni as your 4 Jedi, and then you've got Affy Hollow, Leox Jassy, and Geode as the crew of the vessel as your sort of main characters. Obviously, Reef is sort of your main character, but all of them sort of equally fill this book with really interesting character moments, interesting character arcs, and they're just really likable, well-written characters. And I've just come away from it thinking I want to see these characters sprinkled about in every High Republic story. Really big fan of Reef in particular. I think Reef really stole the show for me. And I read the first chapter and I was thinking, oh, a Jedi who doesn't like adventure, this is going to be interesting, sort of rolling my eyes a little bit. By the end of the book, I was like, this is a fantastic character. I love the journey he's been on. Des was great. Comac and Orla had a really interesting story, and the tie-in with the flashbacks was really, really interesting as well. Leox and Geode are just absolute stars. I love them both. Affy was a really interesting. So I just think my big takeaway from this, except, cool villains, interesting mysteries and all that aside, I just thought it was a really good character ensemble book. And when you compare that to Light of the Jedi, which I absolutely love Light of the Jedi, where it's like introduces lots of characters, does little things with them, but doesn't expand their characters massively, to this one, which is really targeted at its characters. I just think it's a really nice companion to it. It's 2 different types of story, and I just thought it worked really, really well.
No, yeah, I completely agree. It does work fantastically as like a companion to Light of the Jedi. Yeah, by being able to focus in on like those specific 7 characters. I mean, I don't think there's like a chapter in the book apart from the flashbacks where like they're not all in it at one point, or like I think they all have quite a significant impact on like every chapter. Each character I think is explored really well. I think I really liked Orla's journey, especially from the flashbacks, and then where she ends up at the end of the book. I thought was really interesting, and the way Claudia explains her interpretations of the Force and like how that then influences her decision making and what she's going to do once the book ends, or like at the end of the book where she goes off to. I really thought that was a really interesting story that I don't think we've got very often from like Jedi, and it's like, or like explored that well, where it's like questioning not just the Force but like the Order as a whole, and like how the Order tells you, trust in the Force, etc., but then what the Force is telling her is different to the teachings of the Order. I thought that was really clever. And it's like, well, ideally the Order wants you to follow the Order, but then also ideally they want you to follow, your interpretation of the Force. And it was really good, and I completely was gripped about what she was going to do, and like how her decisions would be swayed in each moment by like the teachings of the Order or like her Force like interpretations.
Yeah, I agree. I think there were some really big sort of like questions about the Jedi, the Order, the Force within like each of the 4 main Jedi characters, and I just felt that like this book explores and explained the Force better than most, if not all, of the films previous to it. just the detail in which it went into the Force in so many different aspects, from, you know, Reef's journey to Dez's journey to Comac's and Orla's. Like, they all had to deal with the Force and the Order and being a Jedi in their own way, and they all questioned their very being of a Jedi individually, and by the end of the book came to their own unique conclusion of, or their lessons that they had learned. And I just found it so, like, I think because Light of the Jedi and Charles Soule, he really explored the Force on the sense of like how each Jedi interprets the Force, what they see visually as the Force, and that was beautiful. But in this book, it really delved deep into that question of, you know, like why do we do things the way we do it within the Order? And that's just something that I think is so interesting, because in the prequel era, with the exception of Anakin and his sort of questioning of like, why can't I do this, that, and the other? Every Jedi we ever met was just like, follow the rules, never even question the rules. Whereas we're in an era where like all the Jedi are almost free to question, they're encouraged to question. And if those questions come to an answer that don't line up with what the Order stands for, they're free to go, in Orla's case. And I just thought that was a really interesting sort of discussion that was constantly happening throughout the book. And I do particularly want to touch on Reef's sort of character arc and the Comac and Orla sort of flashback and how that relates to their sort of modern day story, if it is, a little bit later on. But yeah, I agree. I think all of that stuff was just so interesting to read.
Yeah, I mean, I'd really love to see Orla as well in like in a comic or something, just because, one, I think she's just an interesting character to like the way she's described, obviously wearing like, you know, pure white like robes, with a double-bladed white lightsaber as well. It's like, oh, that's unreal. I'd love to see that in you know, future comics or something, because I think that'll look really good on the page compared to like the normal lightsabers that we're used to, I suppose, you know, like blue, green, red, yellow.
Yeah, I'd love to see like a sort of almost like a graphic novel of her, like a 5-issue of her just like out as a way seeker, written by Claudia Gray, just her getting up to adventures and like just following the Force, because that's what her new journey is now about. It's just about following the Force in a ship wherever it really takes her. And I think that would, yeah, I agree, it would make for such a cool comic book story.
Yeah, it's really good. What species is she again? I can't remember. I feel like we've seen them before in the prequels.
She's Umbaran. So
that's it.
She's from Umbara. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really, again, as I've said in a previous podcast when talking about the High Republic, it's a great opportunity to have different species as Jedi that we haven't seen before. Like, the only time we've come across like the Umbarans is, pretty sure, me personally, is in that Clone Wars arc, you know, the darkness on Umbara, where they're not exactly painted in the most positive of light. So seeing one of them as like a Jedi, I think, is just as interesting as seeing the Trandoshan Jedi in the, you know, is it Skier? However we pronounce his name.
Skier, yeah.
And I just really like how they're branching out with like just some more niche aliens as Jedi that we're not used to seeing.
All I'll say is it gets weirder. in the next wave of books, it gets weirder in terms of different alien species. But yeah, no, I agree. I think the High Republic has really fleshed itself out as like its own world, so many different species and characters. And it's getting to the point now where there's just so many brilliant characters. They can just pick them up and just drop them in any story, and you're going to get excited about it. Like, I've just seen that this month's High Republic Adventures is going to feature the vessel crew. So Afi, Leox, and Geode are going to be in it. So we're going to see Geode in comic form, which I need to see, because it will answer so many questions of like, what does Geode really look like, and how does he move, and all these questions that we've had. But just seeing the vessel crew again and them after this story is going to be interesting. I know Out of the Shadows, the next YA novel which is coming out, is going to have Reef and Comac, because they're now Master and Apprentice, featured in that book. So I'm just really looking forward to seeing all these new characters just mingle, you know, with each other, but also with all the weird and wacky new characters that we're getting as well, all these different alien species. It's what has me most excited about this era. It's just the new characters and species and peoples mixing with each other and what those sort of interactions are like. That's the stuff that, take the MCU for example. You spend 2 hours with Ant-Man, and then you see a film where Ant-Man meets Captain America, and then you get really excited because it's two characters that you really like meeting each other. And like the High Republic is almost setting that up on a even bigger scale. It's like, here we spend 11 hours of reading time with Reith Silas, and then in the next book that comes out, he's going to meet Vanestra Rowe from A Test of Courage, and then he's going to be two cool Jedi characters that we like meeting each other. And yeah, it just has me very excited, continues to intrigue me more and more.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point. It's like because these characters in their books are like, especially in Into the Dark, is like so well introduced, and like you really get to understand their character that you can literally just drag and drop them and put them in anything. Like they could be in like a panel of a comic, or just like in a scene in a book, and you're like, oh, nice. That's like one of my characters that I like. And yeah, it just goes to show how broad the High Republic is becoming. Because obviously it's going to go on for a couple more years, I'm pretty sure. Like they've got big plans for it. So I'm really liking how they're developing all the characters and then leaving room for more like, weird and wacky things. And then they can just like, drag and drop different things into different places and have crossovers here, crossovers there. Like the world they're building, I think is going to really pay off in a couple of years' time, when obviously things get like ramped up to like, the big screen eventually maybe, or like a TV series or like video games, when people really get to appreciate how good what universes they're building.
Yeah. And obviously this book is still from the first wave of the first phase, and they're planning 3 phases. And then, we're predicting that each phase is going to have like a couple, 2-3 waves of books and comics and all that sort of thing. So there's so much stuff coming out, and they're already announcing, like an audio drama, new sort of like 5-issue comic series, and all this sort of stuff coming out around the High Republic. So yeah, it's definitely really exciting. But should we dive a little deeper into the sort of the actual content, the characters of Into the Dark? Should we start off talking about Reith? Because obviously Reith Silas is the main character in this. He's a Padawan. His master is Jorah Malley, which, big spoiler for Light of the Jedi, she dies in Light of the Jedi, and also dies in this book. In the sense of she dies on page in Light of the Jedi, and then Reith finds out about her death about halfway through this book, which is a very, part of his emotional journey. Reith is a character who would much rather sit in the Jedi archives studying, reading books, than going off on adventures. He hates the idea of adventure. And his world is turned upside down when his master says, right, we're going to the frontier, we're going to the Outer Rim, and you're going to have a new placing on Starlight Beacon, which is the worst possible thing for him because he loves Coruscant and the library and the archives and everything like that. And then obviously along the way, great disaster happens. He ends up on the Amaxine station with all these other wonderful characters, and has to deal with, killing for the first time, maiming someone for the first time. He has to deal with, losing a close friend, his master, his close friend coming back. He has to deal with someone he trusted in and gave information to turning out to be the enemy, turning out to be the Nile. So he goes through a lot throughout this book, and he's really sort of the emotional core of the story. And I'll just ask John, give me your opinions. What do you think of Reith Silas?
Well, I mean, when I first started the book, I was like, well, this is a bit of, as you say, a strange Jedi that we haven't really come across. The Jedi we're used to is like battle hardened, always up for a bit of adventure. I mean, especially like, you watch like 7 seasons of the Clone Wars with like Anakin, who's always up for something. And then we come across a Jedi who's a bit more reserved, and as you said, like would rather have his head in a book or like be writing, studying sort of thing. But I think as I said, I think Claudia Gray, she perfectly wrote his story across the book, so that it was paced really well. And as you see, you have to go through all these things. Yeah, he maimed someone for the first time, and I think she really goes into good detail about how that made him feel. And he has a really good conversation, I think, with Des or Master. I can't remember the guy's name. Who's the Master? Comac.
Yeah.
I think, yes, Master Comac has a conversation with about like, oh, should I have done this so I didn't end up chopping this guy's arm off? Like, oh, should I talk to him more? And I really like he's like coming into his own about like being a Jedi and, you know, what it means to have to be that person to protect others. You know, you don't, I think what was really good about his story is him learning that to be a Jedi is basically just to be, you have to serve others. Like, it's not about what you want, because obviously at the start of the book we find out that, you know, he wants to stay on Coruscant and he's not happy that his master has asked him to go to Starlight Beacon on the frontier. And then as the, you know, book carries on and he works out that being a Jedi is about serving others, about saving lives, I really like that by the end of the book he's like, okay, what I want doesn't matter because I'm a Jedi and that's a higher calling. And basically I have to do what the Force wills, you know, what is best for others, not just best for myself. Which I think is a really interesting story arc. I really liked the part with the Kyber Arch.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was going to talk about that, yeah.
Beginning of the book, and his master's like asking the question is like, why does no Jedi like cross the Kyber Arch alone? You know, I just thought the obvious answer was, you know, because you don't go through it alone, you go through like the Force or something like that. You know, some Force mumbo jumbo. But then as the book carries on, he eventually figures out the answer himself. Is that, you know, you don't go through it alone, because the reason the Kyber Arch is there is because like it shows the fallen Jedi, you know, those who helped made it. So it's like you as a Jedi are never like a single person. Like you're serving the Order and you're serving the people who you're there to protect. And I think that was a really good lesson for him. That was like literally put right at the beginning of the book, which he then figured out right at the end, pretty much, once he'd been through like all this journey.
Yeah, I thought the whole Kyber Arch riddle was really, really interesting. And because it's said sort of multiple times in the beginning of the book, he's like, yeah, people cross the Kyber Arch alone all the time. Like, what's Master Jorah talking about? And I loved the moment that he realized the lesson was that moment when it was sort of the big climactic third act action, you know, the Drenga and the Nile were fighting each other and they're thinking, right, we need to escape. And sort of Reith realizes, you know, they're not going to be able to escape safely. The galaxy's going to be forever in danger if he doesn't do something about the Drenga and the Nile on the station at the moment. And he has that moment when he's just like, he finally realizes it, because his higher calling in that moment is essentially to potentially give his life so that others can live and so that the galaxy as a whole becomes safer. And that's the whole point of the Kyber Arch riddle, is that, you know, he stands on the shoulders of those who came before. You know, the Jedi Order is all about, you know, the Jedi as a whole, the Jedi of the past and the future. Kind of links in to sort of the Rise of Skywalker's, you know, I am all the Jedi thing. I personally think this is a better way to handle that sort of suggestion. But yeah, I just thought it was, and, you know, what didn't end up being a heroic sacrifice, but what could have been a heroic sacrifice of opening all the airlocks and chucking all the Drenga and the Nile out into space, getting saved by Geode, which is amazing. But that moment hit hard and hit really well, because he'd been juggling the whole book of like, you know, I'd rather be, you know, reading books. I don't want to be doing this. Like, obviously he maims his first enemy. And in that moment, he's really questioning and scared, and he's almost traumatized by just the sound of an arm thudding on the floor that he's chopped off. And that's good, because a Jedi should be like that. But a lot of it is because he's just trying to use that as an excuse not to have to, you know, go off on adventures. And when he's giving the option by the Order of like, what do you want to do, Padawan? Like, who do you want your master to be? Where do you want to go? the fact that because he's learnt the lesson from Master Jorah and he realizes that his role is to serve others, to serve the Order, serve the Force and the galaxy, he accepts that, right, I will go to Starlight Beacon where Master Jorah wanted me to go. And, Master Comac ended up being the right master for him because they were sort of equally learning in the Force at the same time. And I just thought his whole character arc was really, really strong. I really, really enjoyed it. Any extra thoughts on Wreath, or should we talk about some of the other Donnies?
No, I think we can go into some of the other fellas in the book.
I guess you brought it up, so we may as well talk it through. Comac Vitus and Orla Jareni, the two sort of seasoned veterans of this book in the Jedi Order. I thought their story, both past and present, was incredibly interesting. Give us some of your thoughts, John.
I think sometimes when I read books and they got like two parallel stories, like one's like, well, this one was like 25 years ago and like present day, and they run like parallel side by side. Sometimes they don't quite pay off as well. Like the big reveal at the end of like the past story never quite lives up to what you'd imagine it would be. But I think in this instance, especially with like Orla's journey as well, I think it really paid off really well, and it really did explain where each character was at that point in time, and like the decisions they were making at that point in time, and how that really well correlated to the decisions and mistakes they made 25 years ago. I think without that 25 year ago past tense story, I don't think their character development would have been anywhere near as good. Especially with Orla, when it turns out that at the end of the past story, someone died because she chose to follow the training of the Order instead of like following her instincts in the Force. And that led to someone dying, which I think she's obviously carried for that 25 years and has been struggling with, which is why then at the end of this book, she decides to be a way seeker and go off and, find her own path and not just follow the teachings of the Order. And then in parallel, you got Master why can I not say this guy's name?
Master Comac Vitus.
Master Comac Vitus. It's so bad. I've literally had someone saying it to me as well, listening to the audiobook for about 8 hours, and I still can't say this guy's name. His story of how at the beginning of the 25 years ago story, his master dies, and he questions the Order's teachings as to like, why can I not grieve? Why have I got to bury my feelings? Which then goes on to be like, I think as he goes through his life, he questions like the separation of like the light and the dark side that the Jedi have. Not quite seeing it as like a complete cut, sliced down the middle like the Jedi teach, and that thing should be more like not forbidden, so you can learn as much aspects about the Force as possible. So if you close yourself away from one side, you're limiting your knowledge, I think was his view on things. And obviously in the book, when Des Rydan appears to die, I think that the feelings of grief and why can't I mourn, they arise again, which links really well back to the original story, and then links really well to his development and where he sees himself at the end of the book when Wreath asks him if he wants to be like his master, because as he said, they're both still learning in the Force. I think it's a really good opportunity for them both to learn from each other.
Yeah, I think I've actually got the line written out because it's literally my favorite line in the entire book, and it's Comac watches Queen Thandeka with an emotion so strange it took him a few seconds to recognize it as envy. She could cry for her loss. He could not even acknowledge his. And I thought that for me was the most powerful line in the entire book, because like he's just lost his master. And we know the sort of the master-apprentice relationship in Star Wars is sort of often like the father-son relationship or the younger brother to older brother sort of relationship. and his master Simics, I think his name was. I also think Master Simics was literally a snake. I can't remember what the name of the species was, but I think they were basically just a snake species, which is awesome. But, you know, he's lost his master, and he immediately is like not allowed to grieve, because that's the teaching of the Jedi, that, you know, emotions and that leads to, you know, grief leads to anger, to jealousy, to hatred, all the things that Anakin's told constantly throughout the prequels. And he's questioning this. And in that moment where like he sees death in front of him, he's jealous that they're allowed to cry and grieve, because he's not actually allowed to acknowledge that emotion sort of externally or even internally. And I think that actually just contextualizes how much of a burden that specific rule is within the Jedi Order, and probably explains why it ends up going wrong in you know, and Anakin's case ends up going so wrong. And then, as you said, it links so well to when Des, you know, is thought to be dead as well, and all these feelings like rise up in him again, and he says, well, I can't even grieve for this like young lad who's just died, just like I couldn't all these years ago. And I thought that was such an interesting thing for a Jedi character to go through, particularly in an era of the Jedi when we're supposed to see them as at their best and their most purest. Is even when the Jedi are at their absolute best in the High Republic era, there's still severe questions on the rules and how the rules can affect the actual individual. So yeah, I thought that was a really, really powerful moment. And I also agree with you completely on Orla's story, you know, the whole not being allowed to follow her instinct and follow the Force, and the responsibility she feels for, is it Monarch Castle who dies is the name of the character?
Yeah.
And then how, you know, in sort of the present day story, you know, she is now in a place where she is following her instincts instead of what the Order tells her to do. And that is her feeling at her best and her most natural. So yeah, I thought that whole, I was reading the 25 years previous story, like sort of story, and thinking, you know, what is the point of this? Like, it's interesting. We've got, you know, two planets that don't like each other, and the conflict, the role of the Hutts, and the Hutts clearly trying to gain control 250 years before we see the Hutts actually in control. This is interesting, but what's the point? And it was really those last like couple pages that really sold me on like, right, okay, this is saying something very deep about the Force and the Jedi Order from like two separate sides of the same coin, essentially. So yeah, really, really, really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think with Master Comac as well, I'm really intrigued about where his story is going to go, because there were points in the book, obviously, when he was talking about like not being able to grieve, and like the other Jedi characters, I think it was mostly Orla around him, like could sense like inside like the turmoil he was feeling that he didn't then portray outwardly. It really reminds me of obviously like Anakin's like story and stuff like that. So and especially with some of the stuff Master Kovac said with like between the light and the dark, and like how the Jedi cut themselves off from the dark, which is like foolish, etc. I don't know if I'm going to see him like, is he going to turn to the dark side in a couple books or something, just because he can't struggle with this internal, you know, like turmoil anymore. Does he lose someone else maybe, and then that just pushes him over the edge, and he can't keep that grief inside him anymore, and it just bubbles over. It's really got me intrigued about where his story is going to go.
Yeah, definitely. I imagine, obviously, the next book that we're going to see him in is Out of the Shadows, and I imagine he'll probably be continuing to battle with some of these sort of issues. But I also see him kind of quite similar to Qui-Gon in a way as well, with sort of a very questioning nature of the balance in the Force and that sort of thing. But it's going to be interesting how his relationship with Reath going forward maybe challenges or changes his views and stuff. So yeah, definitely another interesting character. We'll touch briefly on Des. Des, there's not as much to say, but also I thought Des was an awesome character. He's your sort of adventurer, swashbuckling Jedi who just loves getting into scraps and always wins, and he's tall, dark, and handsome, and all this sort of stuff. The opposite to Reith, essentially, at the beginning of the book. You know, he loves adventure, whereas Reith doesn't. They're both. Well, he's Master Jorah's former Padawan before Reith, and then he is presumed dead about halfway through the book when he sort of disappears off in one of the hyperspace like pods. They think he's just been killed by the Helix Ring, whereas actually he's landed on the Drengir planet and has been sort of tortured and poisoned by the Drengir. Reith finds him, which was a scene, by the way, which like blew my mind. I was like, oh my God, he's alive. And the way it was written, and like that whole scene just completely like mind exploded. And the fact that he was just so tortured by the Drengir and poisoned and all that him and Reith had an actual like duel, all that sort of stuff, was really, really cool. But I think what I enjoyed most about Des was the change of heart that he had by the end of the book, and almost reflecting on his desire to have adventure was not really fitting within the Force. The Force is sort of like will for him, and that, you know, this was essentially a big lesson for him. And obviously because of the Drengir and all their poisoning and the dark side influence that they have, he needed to go and re-establish himself within the Force, which is why he chose to take the Barash vow at the end of the book. So I thought he had a really interesting sort of character arc, and I imagine we might not see Des again purely because taking the Barash vow is literally disappearing to never be seen again and just live the rest of your life in the Force. But I thought it was a nice little character arc for him and supplemented the other characters quite well. I don't know what you thought.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah, when we're introduced to him as a character, yeah, he's like, he kind of like reminds me of like the Han Solo out of the group, you know, like charismatic, adventurous, you know, always somehow comes out on top, from what we're told. Especially in like comparison to the other three Jedi, I think he's definitely the most outgoing. But yeah, well, I mean, I feel like when he was presumed dead as well, I think it was really interesting. It was really well written because it was just like some of the characters pointed out, but it was just like a pointless death. Like he literally it was presumed such a pointless death. It was literally just, he got trapped in a room and basically just like obliterated by some engines, pretty much, or like ejected into space. It wasn't really confirmed either one, obviously. And it was just a pointless death for such a character that was like, you know, like written to be very adventurous and outgoing. So obviously I was really glad when he turned out to be alive later on. But it didn't seem like he'd suffered quite a bit at the hands of the Dengar. And yeah, as you said, I think then at the end of the book for him to go off and take the Barash vow is such a like shift in character dynamics. And I think, yeah, it works really well with Reith and how obviously he was more timid and like not quite as outgoing, and then like as the book's gone on, they've just like kind of switched places, which I think is really good. But yeah, I don't think we're going to see him again. I suppose he's going to be off on a planet somewhere meditating every hour of the day. So
yeah, unless, you know, a Sith Lord comes and hunts him down like the poor guy from the Darth Vader comic.
Yeah, hopefully not.
Yeah, but no, I really enjoyed Des as well. And I think you're right, particularly that part when they were reflecting on his death and how pointless it was. That bit really really got to me because, you know, that was a really interesting way to describe his death as, you know, so pointless, but it was essentially. And, you know, luckily he was alive. But him being alive, I didn't feel like it was just you know, we're not going to go through with him dying because we don't want to kill off characters who might have potential. It very much served a purpose because it introduced the Drengir to us properly by showing their sort of dark side influence and that sort of thing on other people. So yeah, overall I thought his part in the story was really interesting. I think whilst we're on characters, it would be rude for us not to talk about Geode. Our good friend Jack sent in some questions for us about Geode that we wanted to talk to. He's also a big Geode fan as well after reading the book this month. So it's time we have the Geode talk. Some of the specific questions that Jack asked us was, what do we think about the truth behind his species? Is he something like the Weeping Angels, which I hadn't quite thought of yet from Doctor Who, which I think is a very interesting point. And how has the writer made such a great character out of a rock? I think we can talk about the last bit first. How has Claudia Gray made a rock such an interesting character? You brushed upon it a little bit earlier on. I mean, do you have much else to add in terms of how on earth a writer is able to make a rock such a compelling character?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give a few examples. I think because it was honestly the most brilliant writing in the entire book. Is some of these moments. It'd be like, it's like when Affy would be like in a bad mood or something, and she'd go sit next to Geode, and like Claudia Gray would write it as like, oh, Affy was appreciative that Geode, could sense her turmoil, so like didn't bother to ask her a question or like something like that. So it's basically just she's writing a whole personality, as I said earlier, of him doing nothing, and it was so many often it was like, oh, Geode was clever enough to like not ask a question here or something like that. It's literally a rock that she's created a whole character from. It's not even like a rock from like like Pokemon when they have like arms
and eyes and
eyes and a mouth. It's literally just a rock. You look outside your window or something and find a rock, and that is literally it. Yet she's somehow given him like personality, like a relationship with other characters as well. I think is the most amazing thing.
Yeah, the way that sort of there were lines which was like Geo's reaction spoke 1,000 words, and it was like you could just visualize that it was just a rock standing there doing nothing. But Leox and Affy somehow had this way that they communicated with him. One of my personal favorite bits was when Affy asked Leox when they were on Coruscant, "Oh, where's Geode?" And like Leox was just like, "Yeah, he's out clubbing." So like Geode goes clubbing, and he's a rock. Yeah, so sort of during the final third act, you've got sort of Comac notices like something moving in the shadows, and he's like, "Wait, is that Geode?" And then obviously when Reith is about to get blown out the airlock, he collides into a large rock and survives. And it was Geode who's like saved him, and like Reith has that moment when he's like Reith could finally like feel him within the Force in that moment. The way that it's written, I couldn't imagine them being able to do Geode like in a film or in a TV show, because so much of it is sort of like the narration of the book talking about what he's doing as opposed to actual things that he's physically doing. So no idea how they do it in a book or anything like that, and anything other than a book. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed his character. I thought he was good comedic relief. But also like just you really love him by the end, like the fact he saves Reith's life, and sort of the bit when Orla's going to get a new ship, and she sort of says to him, "I could do with a navigator," and he, without saying anything, like informs her that he's already got his own place, basically. He's such a well done character. So to answer Jack's question, how do we think he moves is basically the question. Is it when people aren't looking he can move? Or is it that he does actually move? It's just this book has written it around him, like us not understanding the way that he moves. I don't know what your thoughts are about it.
I really don't know. I feel like just to get his actual day-to-day job done, which is the ship's navigating, like inputs coordinates and stuff into the ship, I feel like he has to be able to like move things around him, like with like his mind or whatever. I feel like that has to be. But then like when he moves, does he like float around or does he roll? Can he move? As you said, like, can he move without being seen? Or
yeah, I think from like concept art and stuff, he's like a larger rectangle. He's not like a round rock. He's sort of like almost like a square, like tombstone shaped being. So I imagine is it like a slow sort of like sliding along the floor, or as you said, does he float, levitate? I mean, these are important questions that I hope are one day answered. But I kind of loved how this book didn't answer it. Like, it didn't need to answer it. Like, we love Geode regardless of these answers. We know that he is a species, and Vintian is his species. So are we going to meet more of them? What is the deal with them? I don't know, is my honest answer. I kind of like the whole idea that he's like the weeping angels. When like people close their eyes, he's able to move, and then as soon as they look at him, he has to like stay deadly still. That could be funny. Is it just that he's just floating? But then he went clubbing. So if he was clubbing, he would have been dancing with loads of people. I don't know. No idea. But do we even need to know, I guess, is the question.
I'm quite enjoying the mystery behind it, and I'm just enjoying the way it's written. It's like the sound of silence speaks 1,000 volumes for literally like everything he does. But it's just so cleverly done that I can't complain, to be honest. And if they never answer it, I don't think that'll ever be a problem, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be interesting to see like the other High Republic writers like use Geode, because he's going to be in the High Republic Adventures. I think it drops this Wednesday, and that's Daniel Jose Elder writing that. So it's going to be different seeing him in the hands of a different writer and in a different medium, comic as opposed to book. See what happens there. I mean, I've seen sort of one sort of screen grab from it of like him just stood next to a Jedi character and Affy sort of on the side of a ship, just sort of like stood there doing nothing. So doing nothing and saying nothing. So I think it's going to be interesting to see him sort of jump around different writers and see how different writers write Geode. I'd love to see Charles Soule write Geode at some point, just because alongside Claudia Gray, he's like my other favourite writer. So just to see what he's up to as well with Geode. But yeah, we love Geode. I want my Geode Funko Pop. I want my Geode, 3/4 action figure. I want my Geode like pillow and soft cuddly toy. I want my Geode Lego set. I want it all.
Just one big Lego block.
Yeah, exactly. Just a large block of Lego that I can just call it Geode. I think it was what I loved about it was between him and being good comic relief. We'll sort of talk about Leox as well as sort of like the other comedic relief in the book. I was a huge fan of Leox. I understand that Claudia Gray literally, when she was writing the book, pictured Matthew McConaughey in space and then wrote him like that. So he's smoking his spice sticks, and he's asexual. He's like really spiritual. He's just sort of like an ultra hippie. He's just such a funny and interesting character. I really like Leox, and I can't wait to see more Leox because I just found him utterly hilarious, but also quite heartwarming. His relationship with Affy was really nice. And when Affy was dealing with all the stuff with the Bind Guild and Scova and her real parents and all the mystery behind that, which is another whole part of the book, which is really, really interesting. I just loved Leox's sort of almost useful, almost useless advice that he'd offer her all the time. And is sort of like, well, I don't know what you should do here. But that's how I almost sort of envisioned his reactions at all times. So, did you like the boy Leox as well?
I did, yeah. It was good comic relief at times. And yeah, I think his character was very stark difference to like the Jedi, I suppose, which I think they bounce well off each other at times for, again, comic relief. And yeah, just like the hippie vibe, and he's definitely a mix of like Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey. It's definitely like how I was just picturing him. And then when he said it, I was like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, because he was like spiritual in a completely different way to the Jedi, which is why he was quite a good... I particularly thought him and Comac were sort of quite good, like, at odds with... Like, they never clashed, like, actually clashed, but, sort of the way that you look at the two of them as, like, two completely different sides of spirituality. It's like the monk who prays a lot and, you know, lives a very selfless life, and then the guy who just like does loads of drugs and questions his purpose on Earth all the time whilst being a weird hippie. It's kind of Leox.
Yeah, I liked like this description of like all the beads and stuff, and then I think there was like a point in later on in the book when it was like things were a bit more serious, and he like took the beads off. It was like, oh, now you know shit's getting serious. Like the beads have come off. I think it was like when he went to go save Affy on the space station.
Yeah, and the sort of the moment when Orla finds that he's like been smuggling spice, and he's like, and he says it's medicinal, and then like when Des is like near dying at the end, like he puts the spice on him and it heals him, and he's like, "See, I told you it was medicinal." I really loved his character, and I thought, obviously, out of the vessel crew, Affy was sort of the main character, and she had the big important character arc of, you know, finding out about the Bind Guild, about her parents, about her foster parent, and that big moral responsibility of like, should she put the indentured workers first and report her, you know, foster mum, or should she put herself first and try and save the problem within without losing a mother figure? And all that was a really interesting dilemma for Affy. And then you had Leox the whole time being this like strange mentor, but also like bad role model at the same time. You just couldn't really decide which way he flipped. And I just thought that was a really dynamic character to have in the story. And he really mixed things up, particularly when the story was dealing with a lot of darkness. I thought he was quite a good sort of counter to that, and a good sort of light and bubbly character to sort of fill in some of those dark moments.
Yeah, definitely a good addition. I think, you know, as I said at the beginning, there's 7 characters that that Claudia Gray chose to like focus on and have, you know, they were all in every single chapter. I think they all work so well off each other. And I think if you take any one of them out, you know, I think you'd really struggle to have such a big impact that the book had. You know, I don't think it'd be anywhere near as good if you took any character out, especially Leox. So just because, as you said, the way he like bounces off certain characters and the way he like, makes like the darker scenes a bit more, lightens them up a bit, I suppose, with like his out of your own life and like just his chill, calm manner. So I think Claudia Gray's done really well to create such an interesting group of characters and have them bounce off each other so well, so often. Not be like, okay, like this is a chapter, and like you can go like 2 or 3 chapters sometimes in books and like there's characters missing and you really notice it, but having them pretty much all in every single chapter, like all talking to each other at some point or quite often in the chapters, I think works really well. And she's just done a fantastic job to write them all so well together, to be honest.
Yeah, and particularly because like focus jumps sort of between chapter, but within one chapter, your focus is jumping between different characters. You're hearing different characters in a monologues, which is, I just think it's a really interesting and neat way to write a book. And then sort of, I guess the sort of final sort of thing to talk about is I guess sort of like the Amaxine station sort of, and how the Drenga and the Nile sort of fit in within the story. I thought, firstly, having the Amaxine station as sort of the location for the story, I thought was really, really interesting. I love the mystery around it. It was the seeped in history and Force lore and, you know, the connection to the Sith as well. But I also like that it served as like this sort of crucible, essentially, that they all had to like go through to like deal with their own sort of like personal demons or personal darkness. Like this big dark space station almost like was the catalyst for all their change, which I thought was a really interesting sort of way to tell the story, because obviously they all went there because of the disaster and then they came back to Coruscant, but then they all wanted to go back. You know, it was all just like, we've got to go back to the station. And it wasn't just Reith and Comac and Orla, it was Affy as well. It was, so everyone wanted to go back to put something right, you know, whether it was Comac and Orla for removing the statues and releasing the darkness within the station, whether it was Reef upon realizing that Nan was actually a Nile and he had just given her all this information and left them at the space station to do whatever they wanted, or whether it was Affy who wanted to go back and find evidence that she could use against Scova to you know, get her to stop using indentured workers. And so all of them had a reason to go back, and the station became this sort of like not just physical place that the story took place, but sort of it was like the metaphorical sort of crucible that they all had to go through in their life. And I thought that was just a really, really interesting setting, both in terms of what it adds to the story, the lore, the connections to other. I mean, I don't know if you've clocked this, but you've read the Rise of Kylo Ren comic, haven't you?
Yeah.
The Amaxine Station is in that book the Snoke's lair that he has, the big dome thing. I don't know if you've realised that.
I did not, no.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
that's cool.
Where Snoke is in that comic is the Amaxine Station, you know, 200 odd years later. Just the abandoned Amaxine Station. By that time, there's no Drengir. There's probably none of those nasty little BD robots kind about. They're horrible little bastards, aren't they? Those little BDs.
Yeah, I mean, they're savage.
No, 80s, not BD. BD is Jedi Fallen Order droid, the 80s.
It is, yeah, savage.
So yeah, did you enjoy like the Amaxine Station, the mystery behind it, the reveal that, you know, the darkness within it was the Drengir, not the statues, and the statues were put in place to contain the Drengir by the Sith, all those sort of mysteries. Did you enjoy that aspect of the story?
Yeah, I did actually. I didn't actually think of it like the way you just said, is like that was each person's like crucible to go through. I didn't actually realize that. That's actually very true and very well written in. So yeah, it was the catalyst for every person's like journey throughout the book, I suppose. But yeah, I really enjoyed the mystery, like the fact that, you know, it was, everyone just assumed that the idols were there to like contain the dark side, or that the dark side was contained within the idols and stuff. And then obviously it turned out that the idols were containing the dark side within the Dengir. Jesus. And yeah, the plot twist with that I think was really interesting. And yeah, every character wanting to go back to set something right, I think was really good. And I like how it didn't take too long for them to all realise that they all wanted to go back. Because sometimes you can find like one character wants to go back and like another character does, and it takes them like ages to figure out and like cross paths again. I like how immediate it was that Orla straight away went back to the vessel and was like, all right, I want to hire you to go here. And then at that same time, like everyone else kind of showed up and was like, all right, we're going back anyway. So I think that was good.
And I think obviously the sort of the big discovery that the, you know, in linking in with the fact that, you know, Des survived was this big discovery that this was a sort of a station that had these hyperspace pods that could ping to, you know, different planets around the galaxy. And it was way back in the past, it was what the Amaxines used to sort of win battles by, you know, quickly, you know, using this teleport technology. And the Drengir wanted it because it would help them spread across the galaxy and feed, which is what they want to do. They just want to eat meat. And then obviously the Nile, when they found out about it from Nan, it was another sort of addition to the paths that they've already got of like another way that they can just dominate in battle. So the Nile were after it as well. And then, you know, this was essentially became a space station that like was desirable for the bad people in the galaxy. And it was down to, you know, this sort of team of heroes to, you know, not only sort of return the idols so that the Drengir would be, you know, suppressed again, but also like stopping the Nile from getting a hold of, at the time they didn't know what, but getting a hold of these hyperspace pods. And I just thought that sort of the way that all those stories sort of like lingered and the mystery was there with Nan. I was a bit suspicious of Nan earlier on. I was thinking, oh, like I never, the Niall connection was never there, but I always had a weird vibe about her. As soon as the reveal was that she was Niall, I was like, good, that makes sense. But the way that all these threads sort of came together in the third act, and there was obviously this big clash when, you know, the Drengir were released, and then they put the Drengir back to sleep, and then they re-released the Drengir to, you know, fight the Nile as a distraction. I just thought that whole sort of third act felt very cinematic, and I felt that it was I could visualize everything with the station and the battle going on inside. So I thought, you know, Nile continued to be interesting villains. I thought they were, you know, interesting enough in this that, you know, wanted me to see more. They weren't quite as compelling in this story as like the Jedi, but that wasn't the point. They were there as another foil to the Jedi. They weren't the big villain of the book like they were in Light of the Jedi. And then the Drengir I thought were a really interesting concept, you know, this plant life seeped in the dark side. And then when that all came together in that sort of big collision, you know, I just thought it landed really well as a big third act action sequence.
Yeah, I think it's just more credit to Claudia Gray's writing about how well it all fit together after, you know, the fact that they left the station and you think like they all thought that the stories were all wrapped up, and then it turns out that it wasn't, and they all went back, and that all intertwined so well. And the way, and then you had obviously the Nile in there as well. I think, as I said, it goes to Claudia Gray's writing that it's managed to intertwine all these different stories, motivations, you know, like threats, and make it so like, compelling and cinematic, as you just said, because, I can easily imagine that final third, like intense battle, et cetera, like being on like a big screen or whatever. The way she writes it is just so well. I think she's just a fantastic author. Very much looking forward to more High Republic stuff she does.
Yeah, and also this is your wake up call to go and read some of her other books.
Exactly.
She has written 4 previous Star Wars books to this one. I'm just counting my shelf where I have all of them. She's written 4, and I've read 2 of them, and they're fantastic. And the other 2 I'm yet to read, but I'm sure they will also be fantastic. So, and obviously she's one of the High Republic writers, so she will definitely have more books or comics or anything. She hasn't written comics yet, I don't believe, so I'll be interested to see her writing a comic. I hope she does it at some point. But yeah, hats off to a great book, great author, great characters. Overall, very positive feelings about Into the Dark.
Yeah. Very good. I mean, as you said, not quite as cinematic. Well, it's not as cinematic as Light of the Jedi, but as a companion story to it, it fits in perfectly. It does exactly what it needs to, you know, in the amount of pages it has.
Yeah, more like brilliant world building, but on like a smaller, tighter scale, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. It reminds me of like, so you can have like Light of the Jedi is obviously very cinematic. It's like the big film part, and then obviously like Into the Dark is like the TV show that accompanies it. Like you can really flesh things out a bit better, and continue with that world building. Yeah,
definitely. Okay, so should we wrap up our discussion there? Have you got any more thoughts?
No, I think I've covered all my points.
Yeah, I guess what we'll do, because I guess everyone's expecting this, is we'll probably announce what our next book club book is going to be, which I guess is no surprise to anyone. It's going to be The Rising Storm by Cavan Scott. The next sort of main High Republic story, sort of the follow-on from Light of the Jedi, the start of the next big wave of High Republic stories. John is waiting on his book to arrive. So when it does, I'm sure he's going to jump straight into reading that. I have already read it. I will not say anything apart from the fact it's absolutely incredible and it's my favorite Star Wars book ever. So I'm incredibly excited to spend like 10 hours on a podcast talking about it because I have so many thoughts. But yeah, hopefully if John's book arrives soon enough, then in
Hopefully.
in a month's time we can be talking about that one.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully. Waiting for that signed edition to come through.
Yeah.
But if it gets too long, Amazon Prime it will have to be the method of getting it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we do want to do some book club books that aren't High Republic, because obviously so far that's all we've done. We will at some point, but whilst they're coming out thick and thin, we may as well be talking about them because they're relevant and up to date and good so far.
Yes, very good so far.
Right, so we shall wrap that episode up just there. If you enjoyed the episode, you can follow our podcast on whatever podcast app you use, whether it's Spotify or Apple or any of the other ones. You can follow us on Instagram at Live from Vaders Castle and on Twitter at Vaders Castle Pod. And yeah, we will be back. Well, this episode's coming out a little bit late, so we're back in like 4 or 5 days with a new episode of the podcast where we'll be talking about 2 episodes of The Bad Batch. One that came out last week, which we both enjoyed, and another one which will be coming out on Friday, which I'm sure we will enjoy as well. So we will be talking about that soon. And yeah, until then, enjoy yourselves. May the force be with you, I guess. that was a terrible outro. That was awful.
But anyway, thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.